Hello, welcome back to the Lick of the Week videos. It's been a little while since I've had a chance to post. I've been pretty busy in the shop, but I thought I'd squeeze in a video here for this week. I've been thinking about topics to cover for future Lick of the Week videos, and I actually had a really good email from a Banjo Hangout member who asked about transition licks. He wanted to know more about them and have a few to add to his arsenal, so I thought, hey, that's a good topic. I went to the Lick of the Week site to see if I'd covered that before, and I couldn't find that topic mentioned. So if I have talked about Lick of the Week videos in regards to transition licks, I'll probably just mention them in another topic, kind of like offhand. So I don't know why I haven't covered it. It's a great topic, but we'll just go with that. So for the next few videos, we'll just talk about transition licks. When you say licks, there's usually a prefix before the word licks, like backup licks, fill-in licks, and transition licks. And each one serves kind of a different function. So when you say backup lick, obviously it's used in backup. If you say fill-in lick, you're filling in a hole somewhere, maybe a hole in the verse or a hole in the backup. You say transition lick, then you're meaning transition, which means to move from, say, point A to point B, moving from one spot to another. You're using moving from one point to another in the form of a lick. And I always like to think about where and why I'm using something. So if we were talking about a transition lick in a solo, let's say, you might be playing the melody of a song, but the song would change from G to C. The melody, flows over the chord changes, so the song would go from G to C, and you might want to put a transition lick in the middle of your solo, even though it has nothing to do with the melody, because no transition lick really has anything to do with the melody. No lick itself, backup licks, transition licks, none of these licks really have anything to do with songs per se. They're just like musical statements, little musical phrases that you do cool things with. So if I was playing a song that went from G to C, and I'm playing a solo, then I could drop in a transition lick as a cool way to get from this part of my solo to the next. If I was playing backup, then I would use a transition lick to, say, bridge the gap between one chord and the next chord in the song's chord progression. So let's look at it not from soloing. For this video, let's look at it from a backup perspective. So if I'm playing backup, just rolling back up, vamping, at some point the song would leave one chord and go to the next. So I'm going to use the song that I always use in these videos for some reason, which is 9-Pound Hammer. So let's say we're playing 9-Pound Hammer in the key of G. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy. At some point I will leave G, in this case one measure of G in common time, and that would carry me to one measure of C. So if I'm vamping, I would need some kind of transition lick if I wanted to be a smooth player or add some kind of life to my playing to get me from G to C. Now somebody asked me this one time, I think one of my students, we were talking about transition licks, and he said, well, what's wrong with just playing G and then going to C? Why do I have to do a transition idea? I said, well, you don't. But eventually if you just jump from G to C, C back to G, then G to D, and G to D to G, and then G to C again, everything gets to be like these stark changes, There's no flow through the measures. So one cool thing that a transition lick does is, musically speaking, it's a smoother, cooler way to get between the chord changes, and it also builds what we call tension. So let's talk about one of the very fundamental things in bluegrass banjo in regards to transitions that you'll encounter, which is using dominant 7 sound. Now I'm not going to get into deep theory here. Excuse me, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so a little snotty-nosed here. One recurring theme in bluegrass banjo in regards to transitions is players will drop in dominant 7 sounds. In this case, a dominant 7 sound for G would be adding an F note to a G chord. If you add an F note to a G chord, you get G dominant 7, which is a fancy musical term for just good old G7. If I added it down here, It's just another octave F above this one. They're both Fs. So if I add an F note to a G chord and just roll over it, it doesn't even have to be a lick. I mean, licks are nice, but I could just roll over this F note or this one. And if I put it in the right places in a measure, you'll get what we call tension. Tension always wants release or resolution, we say in music. So when you build tension into your roll patterns with that F note over a G chord, it builds tension and it wants to be released somewhere, and it almost always wants to be released to the next chord in the progression, which would be C. So I'm going to use 9-pound hammer for an example. I'm just going to roll around, no transition lick yet, unless you want to call this a lick. I'm just going to call it a transition roll. I'm going to roll around, and somewhere toward the end of my G measure, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe the last couple of beats, I'm going to include a roll that has an F note. And listen to what happens. You'll feel the pressure build up. It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy. So you should have felt a little bit of tension built up, like, ooh, wait a minute, something's getting ready to happen here. I feel a change coming on. Hey, that'd be a good title for a song. I feel a change coming. Ah, somebody's already beat me to it. It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy. Do you notice the difference between those two transition rolls? They both had F notes in them. One came a little sooner than the other one. It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy. I dropped the F note in a little earlier in the measure that time. Listen to the effect I get if I wait almost till the end of the measure. It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy. To me, I prefer, speaking for myself, I prefer to hear the transition roll, the F note roll, come in as close to the end of the measure as I can fit it in, because it has a more, I guess it has more of a dramatic effect, or the tension appears right where it needs to, which is right in the transition point. I had a student who said, John, hey, what if you just rolled that F note the whole time? What would happen? It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too... Well, that would sound kind of funky, bluesy, but it doesn't really serve any purpose as far as transitions go, because there's no effect. It's just that tension the whole time. Yeah, I hope this makes sense. Musically speaking, if you kind of wait around and inject a little pressure right where you want the change to happen, it has a better effect, I guess you could say, than just dropping it in willy-nilly wherever you want. So as a general rule, especially when we're talking about bluegrass banjo and scrope style, the transition licks will tend to come right before the changes. Yes, you can drop them in sooner, but if you do, then you'll have to use your sense of taste and think, you know, is this really doing what I want it to do? If you drop it in too soon, it's kind of like playing poker and showing somebody what your cards are before you make a bet. Not a good idea. So let's think about transitions coming toward the end. So I'm going to drop in this F note toward the end of the G measure. It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy. Now that was just a roll. So rolling an F note, I could have rolled this one. It's a little too heavy. You know, I could have rolled this F note. Same purpose. Different note on a different string. Well, same note, different octave, I should say. What if I wanted to make that F note become a lick? Well, then I have to add some ideas to it instead of just generically rolling over that. To make a lick, a little musical phrase, we need to do something a little more elaborate. Here's a very common one. And what I did was I included the F note to build the tension. Then I played 1 and 5 open. Then I played this roll, 3, 2, 1, 5, with a slide on the third. And that was the end of my G measure. So how would that sound in 9-pound hammer? It's a 9-pound hammer. It's a little too heavy. Of course, same time, but you get the idea. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy. So I'm waiting till the very last part of the measure, the last 2 beats thereabouts of the measure, to drop in a transition lick. The transition lick, 1 and 2 and, it lasts 2 beats. So if I was playing 9-pound hammer in common time, it'd be 4 beats of G, 2 beats are just rolls over G, and the last 2 beats are my transition lick. Live long and prosper. Sorry about that, I'm a Trekkie. So what we're doing is we're dropping in, we're substituting some generic sounding G roll for this G transition lick that lasts 2 beats. Another cool one that I like to play, I'm not really sure where this comes from, but I do it a lot, is to play the first string and move the first string down and then wind up in a C position. So again, toward the end of the G measure, I'll do this. I'll play 1, 5, then pinch 1 and 5, pinch 1 and 5, and that's the transition lick, if you want to call it that. How long does that one last? 1 and. It's pretty quick. It only lasts 1 beat. So at the very end of the first measure of 9-pound hammer, it's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy. I could drop it in, you know, and you can play around with the syncopation. You can maybe do a hammer. There's a lot of cool things you can do to, you know, do variations on these licks. But that would be another transition lick you may hear somebody play. You may hear me play it. Now, Sonny Hosborn, who to me was the king of the stroke style transition licks, had some very cool, very elaborate ways of getting between chord changes. I'm going to show you one before we conclude this video. Sonny would keep this G note, but instead of releasing it, I'm sorry, the F note, instead of releasing that F note going to somewhere else like I did to get to C, Sonny would actually keep that note and stack other notes around it. So let's try this. I'm going to use my ring finger on the 4th string at 3. There's my F note. That gives me my tension, my dominant sound. I'm going to play this roll with the right hand. Index, thumb, index, middle. 3, 4, 3, 1. Then I'm going to add the 1st fret of the 3rd string. So you have to do a little bit of a stretch here. I'll get this finger out of the way. These 2 notes. And I'm going to play the same roll pattern. 3, 4, 3, 1. Then I'm going to move this up, or maybe switch fingers, whichever you like to do, and play this note, 3rd string, 2nd fret, and do the same roll. 3, 4, 3, 1. Now I'm going to release all the notes and play an open 2, 3, 2, 1, and that will be the end of the transition lick, and then I'll wind up in a C. If you counted this out, you'd have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that transition lick would encompass an entire measure. So if I tried to use that in, say, 9-pound hammer, you know, it would gobble up the entire measure, and it may sound too notey. It may be, you know, is notey a word? It would maybe sound like there's too much going on. So again, you'd have to use your sense of taste to determine whether or not you're going to like that lick. But it's one of Sonny's more famous licks. It's cool sounding, and if there was a section of a song that had, say, 2 measures of G, one measure had melody in it and the next measure kind of ran out of gas as far as the melody goes, you could drop that lick in and play that whole measure as a transition lick. So have fun with these, and in the next video we'll just expand on this. I'll show you some more pretty cool transition licks to get from G to C. We'll call it from the 1 to the 4 chord. And have fun with these, and we'll see you next video.